All right, welcome everybody to our fifth and final workshop for the Tech Under 20 Cup. This one is going to be focusing on the pitch and the demo. So let's go right ahead and get started. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the agenda. So we'll go through some announcements, we'll go through some of the theory behind pitching, and then we'll go through some of the practical tips that I think all of you are looking forward to. And as always, if you have any questions, please send me a message on Discord and I'll be happy to answer them. So we only have 6 days until the Cup, so this is super exciting. We have 2 awesome prizes courtesy of the Oakville Community Foundation and RBC. Thank you to everybody who released their videos, who submitted their videos, on February 23rd. Those were due, so we got some pretty awesome ones there. Make sure that everybody submits their business plans by February 28th. So that's the next key deadline. So today's the 25th, 28th, business plan should be in. And workshop number 4 should help you out with those. The fifth thing that we want to talk about is the updates on the demo. So we'll talk about that during the demo sequence within the workshop. And the last 2 things is that we'll be sending out some more information on where to go and the timings for the Cup, but you're going to be arriving at Sheridan College at 9:30 on March 2nd. All right, so let's get started with the pitch. So why do you pitch? You've been working on a project for the past 8 weeks, and that project is probably pretty large. And you probably have a lot of details to share with your story, your journey, everything that was happening, maybe some behind the scenes footage. But at the end of the day, you only have 5 minutes to pitch your idea. So what should you do in those 5 minutes? You should be generating as much interest as possible for your product, your prototype, your idea, your team, everything. So the goal is you want to generate interest from the judges. So when they leave the room, they're like, yes, I want to give this team $15,000. They basically say, take my money, right? And the way you do that is by crafting 5 minutes of pitching in an effective manner, such that you tackle all the questions that the judges might have, or not all of them, but all the important ones, that you answer the things that we've discussed in the 2019 judging criteria, and you really show off why your team is awesome and what you're capable of. So the thing to remember is that you don't want to bore people. So this is something really important. And if you haven't done a lot of pitching, then you have to be careful of, is that people's attention spans go down and down and down. So that's what we're doing 5 minutes. And a good way to stick to 5 minutes and make sure that your presentation is effective is to do 10 slides of 30 seconds each. So in this case, I'm not going to do that because this is a learning opportunity and not a pitch. But in terms of an actual pitch, having 10 sharp slides that convey your points clearly and that you can talk through are quite effective. You get enough movement to keep the judge's attention, but not too much to actually cause distractions. So how do you do that? So here are some suggested slides that I've recommended, and basically this covers the judging criteria that we've talked about. So these are modified from a venture capital pitch, which we'll be talking a little bit later, but that's not what you're doing. You're doing a Tech Under 20 Cup pitch. But let's go through each one of these and we can quickly talk about what it's for. So the introduction is based on introducing your idea, having some sort of story, telling us which team you're part of. And that should flow into a specific story or use case that immediately sets the scene of why judges should care. So whether it's a personal story or a story from users, this should be a way to get the judge's attention and create an emotional feeling. The next component is translating that story into a larger problem. So taking it from an anecdote to something that's actually happening in the world. So in our example of in food insecurity, we can talk about a specific use case about following the story of somebody who goes to school and usually doesn't have dinner afterwards because they don't have money to afford it. So how do you translate that story to a general problem? Well, you can use numbers, statistics to talk about how big that problem is in terms of number of people or opportunity cost or a bunch of other metrics. And then once you've discussed this big problem, you want to talk about how you're going to solve it. So this is why you need to reduce it to a smaller problem. So at your smaller problem stage, this is where you're going to introduce what specific problem you've tackled. So what have you learned from your user interviews? What thing you decide to actually address? And afterwards, you introduce your solution. So you've created a small problem that you can solve, or not created, you've discovered a small problem or refined a small problem you can solve, and then you present your solution. And you explain why your solution is going to solve the problem. And naturally, afterwards, you show how you're going to solve the problem. So this is where your demo can come in and be quite effective, is that your demo will show off what you've actually done, and you want to show how your product actually solves this problem. And we'll talk about the demo a little bit later, but this is a sneak peek. So afterwards, you get the judges excited with your demo and your solution. You want to explain how it's going to be sustainable. And typically in a pitch, you see this as financials, but financials aren't as important. Like, we don't really care about where you'll be in 3 years, because likely these projects are going to be smaller and we're not looking to see the growth patterns, right? This isn't a venture capital pitch. I'll say that again. So we want to see why your project is sustainable, why people actually care about it, and how will it continue after the cup. The next slide should be something about community, the community ecosystem / your potential partner charity. So this is, you have a solution and you have a community that you're working within. How do these two things connect together, and how do they complement each other, right? Because as we've been saying, you don't want to build something that the community or your users don't want. So here's an opportunity to connect those dots together and said, we talked to the users, we talked to other people within the community, we figured out how to solve it, and these are the people we're going to be working with. And this blends really nicely into next steps, because you're going to connect how you're going to use the $15,000 to advance your product, how you're going to be working with the community, how your demo is going to evolve, how the project is going to be sustainable, and finally, this is your conclusion. So this is pretty straightforward, and this is a lot to cover in 5 minutes. So you need to make sure you use your time carefully. And again, you can reform these slides if you feel that you have a more effective way of communicating these points. So the next thing to talk about is the tips on the actual slide deck. So many of you have probably made presentations from school, but try to go on the internet and find some useful pitches that you've seen, watch some pitches, get some ideas on slide decks, because time and time again, a lot of pitches and slide decks aren't very good. So here are some of the key things that I'd recommend for your slide deck and your pitch in general. So the first thing is to use pictures and diagrams. So people are lazy, they don't like to read, they like pretty pictures and nice graphs, right? So these are effective. Some of the top pitches just have pictures on them. That might be an effective strategy, that might not be an effective strategy, but keep it in mind, try to minimize text. Again, this is not a pitch deck, this is an info deck. So these are different formats, so you might see walls of text on my presentation. Do not copy that. So the second thing that you want to figure out in your pitch deck is that you want to be problem and user focused. So one of the strategies used is to create a story behind a persona, a character that you've created, and walk the judges through how that story evolves from the problem to the solution to your demo. In general, you can choose to do that, or you can talk about your problem through another type of story. If it's not from one person's perspective, it can be from the community perspective or from the problem's perspective. So try to be user and problem focused, because at the end of the day, that's what you're pitching. You're pitching a solution to a problem, so don't forget that. And this problem is being solved for a specific user that you have chosen and worked with. The third thing that relates to point number 1 is less text is better. So don't make your judges read. It's distracting, they stop looking at you, they get bored, etc. Right? Less text is better. The fourth thing is make sure that you have a strong start and ending. So make sure that you kick off your presentation with a lot of energy. You start it off with a compelling intro. You don't need necessarily a very sharp hook, as they say. Sometimes rhetorical questions are useful, sometimes not, but this is where the story comes in. You start telling a story and then it feels like a natural presentation rather than a pitch. And at the end, make sure that you conclude well, that you wrap up your main points, that you leave the judges without doubts on why you have the best project within the competition. So the fifth thing is that your deck is there to reinforce. If your deck was the most important thing, we would just have the judges read it. But you're there to pitch, and your deck is there to provide visuals, to provide other forms of communication that you can't necessarily give just with your body language and with your voice. But remember that you presenting is the most captivating and persuasive thing, and your deck is there as sort of a background dancer. So you can think about it that way. The sixth thing is that branding is important. So if you've noticed in the Tech Under 20 decks, we've focused on the color scheme of Tech Under 20. So we have green, we have consistent fonts, and these things allow us that once you see this color and this font, you know that, okay, this is a Tech Under 20 deck. With that in mind, make sure that you have slogans and colors that complement your product, because otherwise it could be quite difficult for your judges to remember who you are. So your judges might see 10 presentations within your room, and with that in mind, you have to stand out as a top 2 team to make it into the finals. So having a consistent color scheme, slogan, a catchy name, and having good branding is going to be important for that. And the last thing is practice. So make sure that you practice and you actually have solid timing between your team and yourself, and make sure that you actually coordinate well. So within your pitch, you don't necessarily have to have everybody presenting, especially if you're a team of 6, but make sure that people are up there with purpose, they have a sense of what they're doing. If you have 2 out of 6 people presenting, make sure it's well coordinated, but don't necessarily have it so that people are standing there without a purpose. So here I've attached a sample slide deck for style and format ideas. So this is a presentation I did last year for one of my classes. And the key thing here is just to notice how the text is set up with the pictures and potentially the animations. Don't look at it necessarily for contents. Again, that was a venture capital pitch, not a Tech Under 20 Cup pitch. And just remember that some of the formatting will be off if you open it as a Google slide instead of a PowerPoint. So that's just there if you want to see another presentation. Otherwise, you can look up some of the effective ones online for style ideas. But again, make sure that you keep the contents based on what's in this workshop and based what's on the judging criteria. And again, this relates to the idea that this is not a venture capital pitch. We're not looking to see how you're going to create a billion-dollar idea. We're looking to see how you're solving a community problem. So again, not a venture capital pitch. So at the end of the day, judges should be interested and they should come away with the message of why are you building something and what are you building? So these 2 questions are essential. So why you are building something and what you are building. And if you can answer these questions clearly with your presentation, that's going to be very, very important. So after presenting and practicing, ask yourselves these 2 questions. Is it clear why you built something, and is it clear what you built? All right, let's talk about the demo now. And as I mentioned, we had a couple of changes within the format. So the major change that we've introduced, it's not actually that major, but you're allowed to have your demo in between your pitch now. So as I mentioned, after your solution slide or wherever you want, you can put your demo and set it up there. So this means that you'll still have 5 minutes to pitch, and then you'll have 3 minutes to talk about your solution / your demo. And please make sure that you stick to these constraints wherever you put your demo. If it's in the middle, at the end, or whatnot. This is not an opportunity for you to have a 7-minute pitch and a 1-minute demo. You'll be penalized for this, potentially quite significantly, and the judges have been told to look out for this. So again, we don't want you to have a 30-second demo, right? The point of this project is not for the person to come up with the fanciest presentation and to talk about pie in the sky. This is to show us what you've built and what solutions exist. So you can think about this as what you would say to a customer or a user when they ask you about your product. So if they want to see it working firsthand, you have to show it to them, right? At the beginning, right, you can present them with all the fancy graphs and pictures you want, but at some point you have to show them the actual product. So that's what you want to be doing during your demo, is you have 3 minutes to show us what you've built, show us what you've developed. If you built a simpler prototype, you can spend more time talking about the process of going through developing the prototype. But again, we want to see what you've built. This is a building competition after all. So again, no 30-second demos. You can have 30-second demos if you really want to, but that's not what we want. And if you do have a 30-second demo, you can't transfer that time to the pitch. So some tips for the demo. So the first one is tell us some stories and use cases that you've created or seen. So this means that you can start off your demo by saying, okay, let's go back to our original story that we started off with about somebody coming home from school and they don't have the money for dinner, right? So how would they use this technology solution to solve their problems? And then you can walk through some scenarios. So the first scenario could be, okay, they don't have money because of X reason. Can they get a food loan, for example? Okay, so how would they use the app to get this food loan? Okay, how do you repay this food loan? So make sure you demonstrate the key features and solutions that you've implemented that are essential to your use case, your problem, and your story. The second thing to mention is that we want you to show us the cool stuff you've built. So at the end of the day, you should have been solving problems, you should have been building things, so show us what you have. Typically the issue with pitches is that you don't actually get a strong feel of what somebody has built. So this should be an opportunity for you to show off what you've built and some of those cool things. The third thing that we want you to keep in mind is that you should be showing off solutions, not features, right? So it's not that important that you have a login functionality, right? It's not that important that you have a settings page. What's important is that the problem you're solving through your technology. So if a screen isn't that important to your actual demo, you don't have to include it, you don't have to talk about it, you don't have to go through it. This should occur naturally as you're going through the use cases and stories that you say, okay, we're going to go to the main page first, and then we're going to go through the analytics page, and then we're going to go to this page, we're going to go to the map view. So show the features that are important to the solutions, and don't just tell us that you built a feature. Tell us why you've built it, and then the feature should come naturally afterwards. So the fourth point is, don't tell us everything about the product. So we know that you'll be really excited to share what you've built, but again, tell us what's important and prioritize that way. So again, 3 minutes is a short amount of time, and if you don't use your time carefully, you can ramble for 2 minutes about the color of a button that really doesn't matter. The next part is that you should have a good outro. So you transition into your demo by talking about the solution, and then you transition out by wrapping up and saying maybe why you've built it or the key functionality that you allow your user to do. The last thing is that videos are good because sometimes live demos go wrong, but if you're going to have a live video as your demo, or sorry, a video as your demo, make sure that you go through all your use cases thoroughly. So if you have a 30-second video, something is wrong. That means either your product is not fully done, or that you actually haven't gone through the ways that people are going to use your product. And within this, even though you might have a video for your pitch, it might be useful for the Q&A afterwards to actually have the live thing that you've built so that the judges can zero in on a specific screen or feature to ask questions about. Remember, you'll still have an opportunity to share things in the 5-minute Q&A session after. So the judges are going to look at your pitch, look at your demo, potentially ask questions about your business plan, so you'll have an opportunity to share more details there. And one thing to note is that you'll be expected to present from your own computer, so bring any adapters you need. We'll have AV on site, but we don't want to be spending 10 minutes to figure out what adapter to give you, so make sure you're prepped and ready to go for that. So the last thing is that dress code. So again, wear what makes you comfortable and confident. This isn't a business competition where you're expected to wear a suit. This is a competition where you're impacting the community. And if wearing a sweater and jeans is what makes you comfortable, go ahead and wear that. If you feel most confident in a suit, that's also great. The thing to keep in mind is look presentable, look neat. It's not a fashion show, but you don't want to come in with ripped jeans and a crumpled t-shirt, right? It doesn't look very professional. You're not going to be as persuasive. So again, wear what makes you comfortable. You'll have judges and mentors wearing a wide variety of outfits, and that shouldn't distract you. Again, be ready to be confident. For reference, I'll be wearing business casual, so if you want to be at a benchmark, that's a-okay. So business casual would be something I'm wearing and probably what most people wear. So that concludes the presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know. Open on Discord. Again, have a good look at the judging criteria, this video, the business plan video. The last thing that we want you to forget about is how this competition is structured. So go ahead, do some outside reading, consult your mentor, but go back to the judging criteria, go back to the workshops to see how things are focused on, because the cup is a little bit different from other competitions. So with that, good luck everybody, and if we don't chat on Discord, I'll see you on Saturday.